But the spike protein itself, we now know, is very dangerous. It's cytotoxic. Is that a fair description?
More than fair, and I alerted the FDA about this risk months and months and months ago. And we had a discussion about it.
And to be fair, the FDA did not think that the S1 subunit and the spike protein was toxic. And so the FDA knew about the biodistribution. And one of the scary things is that the biodistribution like peaks in your ovaries. And
so just to nail the point home, they did know.
They did know.
I did send them the manuscripts. So and their determination was
it's a harmless spike protein.
That they didn't think that was sufficient documentation of the risk that spike was biologically active.
Right. Okay, they did not believe the spike was biologically active. So that was the big mistake.
We now know the spike protein is very dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Is biologically
We also know, so if it was very dangerous, but it did what the brochure on these vaccines says it should do, which is lodge in the membrane of the cells that are doing the transcribing, it would be a lot less destructive, right?
I think that's fair, and you're right. It's not just the the documentation about the vaccine. It's the prior literature that was put out by the people that developed it, that developed these clones. So they were aware that there was a risk of spike being biologically active and having adverse events if it did not stay stuck to the cells that were transfected, that got the RNA and made it. Okay, and they used a genetic engineering method of putting a transmembrane domain on it to ensure that it stayed anchored and stayed put. And they did limited non-clinical studies to say, looks like it stays stuck. Right. We engineered it to stay stuck.
They did,
and they published that. Here's the thing:
specially engineered.
Okay, is that that's generally not good enough in a non-clinical data package. So before we get a product released to use in humans, in the normal situation where we're not in a rush, we have some really rigorous tests that have to be done in animals. And revealing that spike gets cleaved off of expressed cells and becomes free is something that absolutely should have been known and understood well before this ever gotten put into humans. So I'll just leave it at that.
All right. Well, that's the
smoking gun.
Let me just make one thing clearer. You said it very clearly, but lots of people who aren't familiar with this aren't going to get it. Okay. So the RNA gets into the cell. It is translated by the ribosome into a protein. In this case, it's the spike protein, which is the best target on the coronavirus.
We could debate that, but go ahead.
But it's at least a very good one. It's a prominent one.
Good target. And nobody argues with that.
If the antibodies grab onto it, the most likely thing to happen is that they will block it from doing what it does that facilitates the entry into the cell. So if everything works the way the brochure says, it's a good target.
After about 5 days, though, the antibodies have to be.
So the whole reason to use an adenoviral vector or an mRNA is not just to generate antibodies. And a lot of the data, and a lot of us that are deep in this data, think that the way that they're really providing the protection is by cellular cytotoxicity. So you're getting CTLs against it. And that's the reason to use this gene therapy-based technology is not just to generate neutralizing antibodies, but to generate cytotoxic T lymphocytes.
Okay, you and I are about to go down the rabbit hole because this is biologically fascinating, which I want to avoid doing. But you just said the reason to use the adenovirus vector, which is with the DNA vaccines, not the RNA vaccines, which is what we were talking about.
I would call it, it's not a DNA vaccine, it's an ad vector vaccine.
Right. It is the use of
a recombinant virus, which happens to be a DNA virus.
Yeah.
But it's the same basic idea. It's gene therapy technology applied to vaccines.
Okay. It's the same technology, and everything downstream of the translation of the spike protein is the same.
Spike protein?
Yeah.
Is the same. And by the way, we have no problems at all with mRNA vaccines.
Right.
It's just this particular vaccine, because of the spike protein and because it cleaves off the cell and it goes throughout your body and your brain, your heart, and anywhere, that you can have these symptoms that are so varied, whether it's a 16-year-old who can't talk or see 48 hours after injection, or someone who's, handshakes, or someone who's, my carpet cleaner, Tim, he's like disabled now. He's lost $30,000 in terms of his costs, and he's going in for an epidural because he's in such pain. And so these side effects, the victims of this vaccine, they're not being able to tell their story at the press because, Tim says, I try to tell my story and the press ignores him. And we have these groups that aren't able to get attention.
Aren't able to get attention. A large group of people who believe that they have suffered negative consequences was removed from Facebook. So there's very clearly an effort to 200,000
users just wiped off the planet. Right. Now, if this is a perfectly safe vaccine.
So the censoring has been going on for well over a year. It's well documented. It's unequivocal. And my argument is that by implementing censoring, what we're doing is making it so that signals can't be detected.
Yeah.
People's voices can't be heard. And I'm of the opinion that we have to have free and open discussion, and we have to have full disclosure of risks. And when you censor that, you cannot have that.
It changes everybody's mindset into believing it's safe and effective. And when you have that, you don't report these adverse events as being associated with it because you eliminate it.
You don't want to be the fly in the ointment of a great vaccine.
No, you don't think it's possible, right? So when a doctor sees a miscarriage and says, I've never seen a baby like this in my entire career where it's so bloody and the brain is split in half and so forth. She's never seen anything like it. And the woman was vaccinated a month ago and she's 25 weeks pregnant. When you have that sort of thing, the doctor says, well, it can't be the vaccine because the vaccine is safe. Well, and so they say, well, it must be a genetic defect. And they report it as a genetic defect, and they don't even report it into the VAERS system. So we never see any of these safety signals because everybody is trained to think that it's safe. It couldn't have been the vaccine.
So that's this groupthink problem. So and I think it is a real problem.
Here's what they're going to say. So, and I want to work out how this functions, right? I can take your story. Hey, Steve, talked to a couple people who came through my house in various capacities and heard an alarmingly large number of stories that were very frightening. Now, everybody at this table will agree that could be
anecdotal. It's totally anecdotal.
It's not even anecdotal. It could be the result of sampling error. It might.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? And so the point is,
absolutely.
How do you detect if something like that isn't sampling error? You find out what other people are seeing.
Yes, you go look for confirmation.
And at the same time that you were having your experience, I was having a slightly different experience. I was talking to every single person that I interact with, which is definitely not a random sample of people. On the other hand, we're talking about the woman who cuts my hair, my doctor, right? I was talking to everybody I encountered. And I was asking them, my dentist, I asked them, what was your experience? Did you get vaccinated? Yes. What was your experience? And the number of people who had a frightening story was alarmingly large. In fact, I believe it is the case that the only people who didn't have some anomalous reaction were my parents and Heather's mom, which may be because older people have these things less. That may be sampling error. I don't know. But the point is, there were stories that didn't sound like any vaccine I've ever heard of. People who had weeks of fire-like pain in their arm, headaches that would not go away, fevers.
So I'm a regulatory professional, and I do talk to the FDA, and I have good friends there in senior positions. They were aware back when we were doing randomized clinical trials that these adverse events were occurring. Many of them were oddly delayed and atypical for a vaccine trial. This is totally new technology, and that kind of gets at the core. I think one of our problems here is the assumption that this is like every other vaccine we've ever seen, and it's not. It's very different technology.
Right, and so these weird symptoms.